But now the philosophy is that they believe that everyone can fly already, and they are mostly concerned with your personality. There is an expression that says, hire the attitude, train the skill.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast. Oh, yes, this is the day that you've been waiting for when we have our international guest. And it is, of course, a very special one. We will be very glad to introduce you shortly to this special person that's with us today. But always, we have to remind ourselves and be grateful for the support of these two amazing companies. Both are based in the southern part of our amazing country, Brazil. And the first one is Escola Realizar, flying school located in the city of Torres, and that means towers in English. Yes, of course. And that's in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. And they have this amazing setup, and they are always looking to become better and better every day and provide you the best flight training experience. So thanks, Realizar, for being so supportive. And of course, Hangar 33, the favorite brand of aviation clothing. So when it comes to flying and having a nice gear to wear, we always come back to Hangar 33. So if you want to go online and shop, remember we have this e-commerce discount voucher, and that's Born to Fly. So go ahead and get yourself some stuff. So, and I will now, before we go ahead, we have Henrique Carneiro today with us, which is a very good surprise for me. And Daniel is over there as well, teacher Dani. Caio also today. And João Vitor, who's going to introduce you guys to our guest.
Hi, Felix. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again. And yeah, thanks to Henrique, we could get in touch with this amazing person, Theresa, which I have known just a couple of months ago through another friend that sent me her page and said, oh, she has a weekly Clubhouse meeting. Check it out. And then, oh, yeah, I will. And then Henrique suggested, oh, you should bring her to talk with you guys. So, yeah, here we are today to talk more about her and about the career in the US, because she's an airline pilot and she'll let us through it. Captain Theresa, welcome on board.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, that's so cool. Thanks for accepting our invitation. And let's go straight to the point. So, how did your aviation career started? Why did you decide to become a pilot?
Well, I decided to become a pilot when I was 11 years old. I was at an aviation museum with my dad and my brother. And when I was at the museum, there was a very boring old man telling us about airplanes, and I was so bored. And when he was done talking to my dad, I said, Dad, that was so boring. And my dad said, but people love aviation. You have to put yourself in their shoes and understand why it's such an amazing, wonderful thing, because so many people have very strong feelings about it and they love it. And I started thinking about why aviation was interesting. And earlier that summer, someone had told me you were going to have to work for a living when you grow up, so you should do something fun. And I was young enough to believe that I could still get a fun job, but I was old enough to believe that I needed to have some kind of job. So I said, well, that's it. I will be a pilot. And when I was 11 years old, I started telling people I was going to be a pilot, and then I continued on for the rest of my life.
This is pretty much the story that we normally see, apart from the part that you started from a boring side and then you had that curve of, oh my God, no, okay, this is amazing, actually.
Yeah, I loved it. And I didn't know how to become a pilot, but when I was in high school, so in my early teenage years, I met a friend named Erica who was already taking flight training lessons. And she told me everything I needed to know. She told me about careers and about how I could go and get a college degree. And she encouraged me to apply for scholarships so I could get into college. And it was because I had a mentor. Even though she was my age, she was a very good mentor, and she taught me how to do it.
It's so important to have a mentor, and especially in this career when sometimes the paths are blurred. And then we have nowadays e-mentors like you, right?
Oh, that is my passion. I don't know how many people I mentor because every week it changes. People send me messages from around the world and ask me questions about flight training. It used to be at least one message a day from someone new.
I mentor maybe one or two guys, and one is Kyle, but he's about to quit.
I love it.
Well,
some of my mentors, one of my mentors or mentees, I've had for 5 years, and some of them I only talk to once, and then I never hear from them again. But it's always fun. I really like helping.
Let us be enlightened geographically as well. So, and pretend I never asked you that during the briefing, but where are you located right now? And tell us about a bit of your flying experience from where you came.
Okay, so for most of my life, I have lived in Michigan, obviously in the United States, and I still live there now. I would love to move to a warmer climate, like all of you, but my family and my friends are here. So I live near Detroit, and most of my career I have worked in that area. The major airport where I fly for my regional airline is Detroit. So I could tell you about my education.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Of course,
Please,
go ahead. Just feel free. It's a podcast, so you can talk as much as you want.
You have the ball and you want to run, you may run to the direction you want.
Yeah,
right.
You don't have to look for mic flashes here.
I'll tell you about my education, and then I'll tell you about my flight instructing career before I went to the airlines. But
Amazing.
I've always believed that it's good when you have interactions and they don't just have to listen to one boring voice. So that's part of my teaching style.
That's totally understood. However, sometimes on the podcast here specifically, we have been receiving the feedback that we are constantly interrupting the guests. So they're like, just let them talk.
Oh, okay. Well, so I can tell you about my education. I grew up in a family that was lower middle class. I did not know how to afford my aviation or my flight training. And my only hope was to get scholarships. So I worked very hard in high school. I had volunteering activities and leadership activities and a lot of extracurriculars. And I had great grades. And I was very blessed and fortunate that I got 2 scholarships that paid for a university. And that university also had an aviation program. Well, now I could go to college, but I still didn't have enough money to pay for flight training. And I started taking a few lessons and I almost had to quit. But then a major airline in the United States offered a huge scholarship. And because I was already doing a lot of volunteering and I was leading a group of students, it was actually a theater group, which is kind of funny, but I founded an organization with a theater group and I was leading it. And because I had all of these activities, the airline thought I had leadership potential and they gave me a scholarship that paid for all of my flight training. It's very unusual and rare to get a scholarship that big. So I got my training and I graduated from the university with a degree in aviation in 2003. And that was a bad time economically. as many of you know, because it was just after the incidents of 9/11 and the economy was bad. So there were not a lot of jobs. Even though I had a scholarship, I wasn't guaranteed a job. So I had to become a flight instructor. But before I became a flight instructor, I actually was so poor from paying the additional costs for flight lessons that I almost couldn't even afford to become a flight instructor. My main meal was ramen noodles. I ate these cheap noodles and I'd have like a little eggs and cheese. And that was my only meal the day, every day, because I had so little money. I was just trying to pay for flight lessons. So hard. So I think that was a bad idea because that was a very poor nutritional diet. And so I think
we all love ramen noodles, but if I would go for that diet, it would be amazing for the budget, but terrible for my belly.
Yes. Well, I think I might have had some health issues later on because of that, but thankfully I'm okay now. So then I became a flight instructor, and at first I thought I would only be a flight instructor for maybe 1 to 3 years, which is pretty common in the United States. But I ended up being a flight instructor for 12 years, and there were many reasons. First of all, I really enjoyed it, and some of the reasons had to do with the economy also. I almost could have gotten hired at the regional airlines around 2007 or 2008, but I had just changed the flight school where I worked, and I had a lot of changes in my life, so I didn't go in. And then there was another recession economically, and the airlines weren't hiring for several years. Also, at that time, the regional airlines in the United States had a poor reputation. They didn't pay a lot, they had bad rest and fatigue rules. And so I just decided to stay in the world of flight instruction, but that ended up very well for me. So I ended up becoming the chief flight instructor of a flight school, and we had a program called a Part 141 program, which you've probably heard of. That means it's like a special FAA certification for a good program. And then I became the manager of the whole flight school and the company, which we called a fixed base operator, and also called an FBO, or Foxtrot Bravo Oscar. And
we can see the teacher right there.
Yeah. I try to avoid acronyms. I try to say flight instructor instead of CFI because I'm used to talking to people who don't know a lot about aviation. So,
brilliant.
Yeah. So, but the flight instructing was wonderful. It was very difficult, but I also enjoyed it. I was very passionate about it. And I received a big award. I became the flight instructor of the year for the FAA Great Lakes region. That is a region of 8 states. And that means that I was a finalist for National Flight Instructor of the Year. I believe there were 7 finalists for National Flight Instructor. So I wasn't at the top level, but I was at the second to top level. There are 4 levels. There's the region or the district, and then the state, and then a bigger region, and then the country. So that was a really nice award.
Yeah, sorry to step on you, but yeah, congratulations on that one. And it's nice to learn that as well, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't know if we have such a thing in our country, in Brazil, because this is very nice to enhance, teaching abilities and to recognize the ones that are like really, how do you say that in the US, like reaching for the golden coin, or how do you call that? Like you're really stepping up for that.
Yeah, motivated, dedicated, the ones that really care and go above and beyond the call of duty. It's a great idea. It did incentivize me because I really, really, really wanted to get the state award. And it was a surprise that I got the award for the level above it. But I was trying to do a good job, partly because I wanted an award, because flight instructing was very competitive, and especially with a bad economy. And so I wanted to get awards so that I could get more clients and get better advertising. The award is a great idea. It's based on 4 subjects or 4 criteria. So the first thing is it's based on how many licenses and certificates the flight instructor already has and how many they have acquired in the last 5 years. And then the expectation is that the instructor will continue to learn, and they show that they're always learning and they haven't stopped learning. And then another one is based on how much they have trained other students or other clients how to fly. And because I was a full-time flight instructor, I had trained many students who had gotten licenses, and most of them had passed on the first try, so that really helped. And then the next one was about how much we promoted aviation to the general community. And I had designed 2 websites, one for myself and one for my company. And I had put all of these educational materials on the website. And so they really liked that because I was already promoting aviation. And then the last reason that I was given the award was for volunteering. And even then, I loved going to schools and speaking to school kids and giving special presentations. So I really haven't changed that much, even though it's been several years. But
we can see that.
Yeah.
It's so nice to hear. We have this little, behind the scenes group where we chat, and JV was already like, oh, she's so bright, like the way she speaks.
Yeah,
so
I would stay here all day long listening to Theresa. Seriously.
What I was trying to say is that Theresa has always been grabbing for the brass ring. That's the expression that I wanted to say. And we can see that you're still doing this here with us, because you're the same way you were doing exactly what we want to do as well, and you've been doing that very amazing using the platform of what's the name again of the platform? Clubhouse, that's it. And I think Enrique was one of the first guys that I actually chat on Clubhouse. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
I would love to. Clubhouse is called Drop-in Audio Chat. It's a social media platform where people talk to each other. Imagine if you had a Zoom meeting without video cameras, and people from around the world could come together and have a conversation about almost any subject that they want. It's a very engaging type of social media because you're not just looking at pictures that might be airbrushed or maybe making you feel bad that you're not perfect. You're actually having a real human connection, and you can speak about almost any subject you can imagine, from aviation to families to, I don't recommend it, but adult subjects, to politics, to the news, to almost any subject that you want. And you can design your experience so that you see recommendations for what you are interested in. So we have a wonderful aviation community on Clubhouse. We have pilots and other aviation professionals, including air traffic controllers and mechanics or engineers, and so many other flight attendants and just aviation enthusiasts. And we come together in many different clubs. Those are like different conversation series. And we speak about so many different conversations. In our club, we give free ground school lessons to teach pilots about aviation. But there was another club that used to hold safety rooms. And some of the safety rooms were wonderful because they would have these scenarios with an aircraft accident, and pilots, flight attendants, dispatchers, mechanics, and air traffic controllers would all work together to find solutions to these imaginary problems. It was very exciting and very educational.
This almost sounds like a good opportunity for pilots who want to prepare for selection processes to be involved in such a task-oriented scenario when you have to discuss with your peers and find a solution?
Oh, it's been wonderful. And we've hosted a lot of sessions about interviews as well, about how to interview for airlines. And we've also had a lot of people with more experience mentoring the people with less experience. And already there's been some people who have had various career connections and mentoring and better opportunities because of it.
How do people find you over there then?
Anyone with a telephone or with a cell phone can download the application for Clubhouse. It's available to the general public. It's on iOS and Android, and it's very easy to sign up. You need a username. Most people use a username like they use on Instagram, and then you're supposed to use a profile picture. If you don't, most people won't interact with you as much. And you're supposed to use your real name, but I don't actually use my real name. I just say Capt and Theresa. I don't even use my last name for privacy. So and then once you are on the application, there is a search bar at the top, and you can tell it the topics that you are interested in learning more about. It's almost like searching for podcast topics, except now you'll be able to speak back instead of just listening. So if you type in words like pilot flight training, which is our club, or aviation or aircraft, then you will see all of the different clubs. And there are many clubs in different languages and hosted by people from almost every continent on Earth. Actually, every populated continent.
Antarctica doesn't count for that.
I could not help going back in time when you were talking about your CFI, your flight instructor experience in the beginning of your career, because I started my career in the United States, and my first flight instructor, he was working for a regional airline at the same time as he was a flight instructor at this location that was also Part 141 approved back then. And it's very interesting for our listeners to hear something like that, because people that don't know the reality, they think that in the United States, aviation is easy for everyone. And we know that in the beginning of the career in the United States, it can be as hard or even harder than it is in other countries. There are just so many pilots in the United States, it's very hard to find the first job. So it's really interesting to hear that. And can you give people advice regarding this? Because I know that lots of our listeners are thinking about the possibility that we'll talk later about the new visa and this new door that is opening up. So it's important that they understand how it is the beginning of the career in the US.
Yes. So my flight instructing career was very difficult, and there is not a lot of money. Now it's better than it used to be when I was starting. But I don't know. Yeah, I think most years I made about $20,000 a year as a flight instructor, and that's barely enough to pay a low rent or afford food. Some years I went into debt. I barely had any money at all. So I just had my credit cards. And it was very difficult. I would often work 60 hours a week for several years. I averaged 60 hours a week. If I wasn't actually flying, I was at the airport trying to get new clients, or I taught many ground schools, which was another way of getting clients. I taught classes at community colleges and created different courses. And I was always working or studying or trying to market to get more clients. Now it's a little bit easier because there is a pilot shortage. It went from being a bad economy from like 2009 to roughly 2013 or 2000, really maybe almost 2015. It was very difficult to flight instruct at the time. But now it's changing rapidly because there is such a pilot shortage. Most flight schools just want a flight instructor with the bare certification, the minimums, and with some good people skills and verbal skills. And it's much, much easier to get hired now. And gradually the pay is improving and getting better too. But it is still considered to be an entry-level job. And a lot of flight instructors work many long hours. It's not always easy.
And what's the usual path after being a flight instructor? How does the career progresses?
Great question. So the normal aviation job starts as a flight instructor, and then the next path that is the most common is to become a regional airline pilot in the United States. And then after that, you can eventually get a job at a major airline. Right now, it's probably an average of 5 to 7 years working at a regional airline before getting hired at a major airline. However, that is also changing rapidly because there is a shortage at every level of pilots. So now it might just be maybe 3 years for a lot of pilots, but it depends on which airline they're trying to get into and a lot of other different circumstances.
It's nice. It's probably the best situation of the market so far that we have seen, at least in our generation, right?
It is wonderful to be a pilot. Right before the pandemic started, the airlines were just starting to panic a little bit about where to hire more pilots. Our regional airline was just starting to get concerned. They already had been increasing bonuses and making the pay better and better and better. The pay is 3 times better now than it was 15 years ago, 3 times better. But they were still getting nervous, wondering where they were going to get the pilots. Then suddenly, when they were getting ready to make dramatic changes, there was COVID and the pandemic. And then a lot of airlines got worried that they had too many pilots, and some pilots got furloughed, which, as you know, is like a temporary layoff. Some pilots lost their jobs completely. And a lot of the large airlines, the major airlines, offered early retirement packages to their experienced pilots because they wanted to avoid laying off the lower level people who got paid less. It was better to pay the people with the high pay and the more experience just to go and retire. So thousands of pilots retired that were experienced pilots. Then when our travel started to improve as the pandemic changed and the vaccines came out, now the airlines were faced with a double shortage because there was already a shortage before the pandemic, and then they had the retirements after the pandemic or during the pandemic. So even though the levels of international travel are not where they used to be, there is still an overall shortage because of all of these different items that added up together.
That's amazing. Yeah, good to hear that.
Yeah, it's a great time to be a pilot. Every month we hear amazing news about different perks and bonuses that the airlines are offering to pilots to try to get more pilots in the United States. And we keep being surprised at some of the announcements, how airlines are offering more guaranteed jobs and better pay, and it's great. It's not great for airlines, but it's great for us.
Yeah, of course. And then how is it for us to prepare to get into these airlines? Like, do you have special recommendations and on like differences from maybe selection processes in the Middle East, for instance, that is different than in the US?
Well, I only know about the United States. I wish I knew more about other countries, but I can tell you that I can tell you the general process. So most regional airlines and national or major airlines First of all, the first thing you need to know is that they don't care where you come from as long as you have the proper visas and you can work for them. So a few days ago, I was speaking with someone from Asia who was worried that they might discriminate against him or maybe discriminate for age. The good news is that the airlines in the United States will not discriminate against your national origin or your race or your age. You could even be 64 years old and they would still treat you fairly in an interview, even though you are required to retire at the age of 65. They would still give you a fair interview and hire you at 64. Most airlines in the United States have a process that is based on points. There is a digital computer application, and everything in that application is assigned a certain number of points. So the level of education that the pilot has gets a certain number of points. If they have a bachelor's degree, they get more points than a 2-year degree. If they have a master's degree, they get more points than they would for a bachelor's. And then the grades get a point. And then they look at your future, they look at your volunteering activities, and you can get points for volunteering activities. And we don't actually know all of the secret formulas, but it's my understanding that you get more points for leadership activities as well, leadership and volunteering. They look at organizations that you are a part of, professional organizations. And then they also can have negative points. For example, if you have speeding tickets for driving your car too fast, and not that we know any pilots that like going fast, but if you have speeding tickets, those are negative points and those count against you. Hopefully you don't have crimes or any alcohol violations, but if you are caught with substance abuse, that's very negative and very difficult to get past at an airline. And then they look at whether or not you were fired from different jobs. They also look at your job history to see how stable it was. Some airlines only want a 10-year job history, but some airlines want your entire job history with the name of every manager that you had and phone numbers. And that's difficult because some of the companies are out of business and you just have to write out of business in the application. But it can take a very long time to go back and find all of the information that they need. And one of the important things that they look for is to make sure that there's not more than a 1-month gap in either employment or education. They want to see that if you lost a job, you got another job about 1 month later, or you were in school again. And it can get difficult because some pilots like to go and travel between college and employment. And maybe they were traveling in Europe for a year. Then they have to get a witness and they have to show proof that they were traveling and they weren't doing something like going to prison or something untrustworthy. And there's always a way to show the airline that you were doing the right thing, but it just gets more and more difficult if it wasn't a normal pathway. And there are many companies in the United States that are professional companies that will help pilots just with preparing their job applications and their interviews. And pilots can pay hundreds of dollars for help just to look like they are the proper candidate to get hired.
Well, that is really interesting. And it's the first time when I hear such a complete explanation on the whole process and how this consistency matter really makes a difference when being hired or not.
Yes, pilots need to keep very good records. We need to know about every flight test that we took and what the outcome was and the date that we took it. A lot of that is in the logbook, but we say that you know that a check ride is an exam for a license or a certificate, but even if someone is doing something called a stage check, which is like a partway check in a 141 program, we have to report every single one of those to the airline. and whether or not we passed or failed. And if we failed, why we failed. And a lot of pilots don't even remember because it was so long ago, but we have to go back and keep these wonderful records. Unfortunately, we also have to have records if we had any FAA violations or government violations for regulations, and lots of other records as well. So a pilot should try to be on very good behavior and try to keep very good records.
And also this brings to my mind one of the aspects that we normally advise, and we tell this to the students when they start in their career, to keep good organization on their flying hours in terms of logbook and so on. But also now when you're saying this, it makes me think that we could add a little bit more into, like, just go ahead and save all your check ride files and maybe print them out and have them translated into English, and then put them aside, file them in a nice plastic folder, and bring them with you in a very organized fashion or matter, so that you keep these records. If you plan to go abroad one day, you don't have to start chasing for every single piece of paper here and there. And as you said, like, I had a bit of this experience of one of the airlines running out of business. It was called Webjet, and simply it didn't exist from one point to the other, because I managed to get a second job after that one. And then I had to find my chief pilot, and he was already somewhere else. So I had to staff ticker here and there to try and find him. So in hindsight, if I should done this before, when I just, okay, now I'm done with this paperwork here with Webjet, I'm moving on to TAM, which is LATAM nowadays. Should have done this, I wouldn't have to run and look for him again. But so that's another lesson for our audience right here. So very good.
Yes, and maybe you won't need all of the records, but it's better to have too many records than too few, especially if you're changing countries, because there are differences in how different countries log numbers, and it can be difficult to establish trust if you do not have the documentation.
Basically, you have to have a proof and to explain how was your path, right? In a way that you can show the interviewer, oh, here's that what I've done, and I'm here. I'm a trustable person.
Yes,
we had a couple of other experiences with selection specialists, and they mentioned the aspect of the bias. When you show that you have your folder with everything there, this guy goes like, okay, he is prepared, or he or she is prepared. On the other hand, when you don't have, okay, do you have this paper? Oh, no, I don't have it. So like you're jeopardizing the bias already.
Yes, that is a great point, because most airlines, at least in the United States, will look at your logbooks and your paperwork before they interview you. When you go to an interview, they put you in a room with other interview candidates, and they make you give them all of your logbooks and all of the other required records that they need. They need transcripts from universities and schooling. They need copies of all of your licenses and medical certificates and passport. And they will look at how organized your paperwork is, and they'll be reading it before you walk into the room and they start asking you interview questions. So if your logbook looks nice and organized and you have nice handwriting, that's going to make a better impression. Now, don't worry, because nobody is perfect. This is where a lot of pilots start to panic and they say, oh, but I have terrible handwriting. So there are some tricks. It is acceptable to have a computer electronic logbook that is printed out in a really nice format, and you can get it in a binding that makes it look like a nice book, but they will still probably want to see your original logbooks from your flight training anyway, because they know that you started out with a regular logbook. And the other encouragement is that nobody is perfect. everyone is going to have small mistakes or maybe an accidental violation on their record or something like that. A lot of the interview is seeing that you've learned and grown as a human. So maybe you did have 3 speeding tickets when you were young, and you can go in, and the best way to answer that question is to say 3 things. You say, I'm sorry. You say, I've learned. And then you say, I've taken corrective action, which means I have found ways to fix my life so that I don't do it again. And now you can see that I have a much better record in my recent history. I made mistakes when I was young, but now I have changed and I have learned. So the longer you can go after making your mistakes without making new ones is good. But also just showing that you are very apologetic and you take ownership and responsibility is so important. If you say, oh, it's not my fault, it was somebody else's fault, that is when there's a problem because you did not take ownership of your mistakes.
Well, such valuable inputs right there. Theresa, it's so good. Well, and that's why you have so many followers on your Clubhouse, because it's captivating, bro.
Oh, thank you.
So good. We're just like, I can see like João, it happens like this. Every now and then he goes so into the flow that I want to see if João is going to ask you a question, but he's so, oh man, this is so good. Such a good opportunity.
I was almost meditating here listening to her. Seriously.
Oh, that's great.
If you have bad handwriting, you can always have your good mate writing the colorful post-its on top of the pages and lots of means. But as long as you're always trying to be better, I think that's key, right?
Yes, and actually, I'm one of those people who does not have as nice of handwriting as I would like. So when I went into the airline interviews, I did everything I could to overcompensate for it. I printed out these really nice, I guess you could call it a placard, but these nice labels for my logbooks. And I got a special file folder where I filed them really nicely. And I printed up a summary of all of the tests I had taken and I laminated it. And so I did everything I could to help make up for the fact that my handwriting wasn't as nice as I would like. And so there are tricks that you can do if you know where your weaknesses are. You can just try to improve it.
Of course, like in these selection processes nowadays, I think in most of them, you will not be required to handwrite like a whole text on any given subject. It's like everything goes verbally. And when you do your psychometrics, normally it's computer-based. So guys, don't worry about the handwriting, but try to make it look nice when you submit your paperwork. Right?
Yes, and start a computer logbook early. I recommend both. There is a big debate about paper logbooks or computer logbooks. I believe the best answer is both. And then if there's a problem with your paper logbooks, you can print off your computer logbooks and it will look really nice.
Any tips on simulator rides, simulator profiles?
In the United States, we typically do not have simulator rides. It used to be that way, but now the philosophy is that they believe that everyone can fly already, and they are mostly concerned with your personality. There is an expression that says, hire the attitude, train the skill. And in the airlines, they believe that the skill is already mostly trained and that most people can learn. If you really had trouble, they would discover that in training. But they found that the simulators were very expensive and difficult, and they didn't really make much of a difference in the quality of the candidates that they were receiving. So in the United States, most airline interviews have no simulators. They are mostly human resources questions, And some airlines also do leadership activities and group exercises where they will give a scenario like the one we were speaking about earlier, where they have some kind of aircraft emergency and they put you with a team of crew members, and they see how you would resolve the emergency and which questions you would ask. So they're interested in leadership and teamwork and personality, but the actual flying skills, they're not as concerned about.
So we should focus on the non-technical skills to prepare yourself for those interviews first before worrying about any simulator stuff, right?
Well, yes and no. Once you go to training, the training will be difficult. So obviously you still need to study for that too. And they will ask knowledge questions in the interview. So they might ask you to give a briefing of an instrument approach plate, and then they'll give you a long weather forecast, and they'll make you read the weather forecast and say if you would need to have an alternate airport at the time of arrival and whether or not certain airports would be appropriate. They might ask you about the airspace questions or aerodynamics questions. Those are very popular. There's actually a great website which is called aviationinterviews.com. And you can look up most of the airlines in the United States and what their interview process is. And you can see the actual questions that they ask people. The only warning I have is that you should not read the answers that people gave, because a lot of those answers are given by the people who failed the interviews. And if you gave that answer, you would sound like everyone else who read the same thing. And so you want to make sure that you have unique answers that are better for you. But there can be a lot of technical questions on the interview too. It's just not flying the simulator.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then those are the type of skills that you can train at home. You know, having a mentor like you, talking to friends, more experienced pilots, you can enhance those abilities, not as much as flight simulators. You know, not everybody can pay for a 4-hour sim ride just to practice for an airline interview. So this is a good thing.
Yes, and pilots in the United States do a lot of training on how to interview. You can hire a one-on-one consultant to help you interview. You can go to all-day long seminars that teach interviewing skills. And pilots will pay a lot of money just for practice learning how to answer questions properly. There are, I believe, 3 types of questions that are common. 4. One of them is general questions about the pilot's history, like their job history and education. The next is questions that we call tell me about a time questions. Tell me about a time that you had good customer service. Tell me about a time you got into an argument and disagreed with your captain. That kind of thing. And then they have the what would you do questions. We call those the WWYDs. What would you do? And those are, what would you do if you are a first officer and the captain asked you to lie to the passengers on a PA announcement? Or what would you do if you had to, the airport was closed and you had to divert and the weather was getting worse, and they can add to that. And what is the last one? Oh yeah, the last one is technical questions also. You know, like explain what V1 is, explain what critical Mach is, what is Dutch roll, that kind of thing.
Nice, very interesting.
It is really, really cool. I haven't heard about it. If I may, like attitude-oriented interview process, right? Because in Brazil we focus a lot in technical skills. It is quite different. We do have interviews that are that they want to hear from you about your personality and your attitude, but we do focus a lot on technical stuff. And I would like to ask you about this way of conducting the process. Do you think that's the reason for this is because you're hiring and already an ATP that it has 1,000 and more than 1,500 hours, and so it's supposed to be an experienced pilot. Do you think that it takes into account for this process?
Yes, I believe that is part of how or why it is that way. So in the United States, with a few exceptions, but in general, most pilots have to have 1,500 hours before they get hired at a regional airline. And that's a fair amount of experience. And the airlines believe that they have a very good training process. So they're not very worried about the pilot's technical skills because they believe that the pilot will either succeed in training, or if they don't, maybe they will wash out. In my training class, I think we had about 30 people and maybe 3 washed out or dropped out. They failed. And so it does happen. Some people do fail. So, but yes, they really want someone who will be a pleasure to fly with. If they are with you, because a lot of the interviewers are pilots, if they are with you on a 4-day trip, they want to make sure it'll be an enjoyable trip. And they want to make sure that as a captain, you will use common sense and see the big picture, and that you will mentor other pilots around you, and that you will have good teamwork. So you won't just be an authoritarian who makes all of the decisions yourself, but you will involve your crew, and you will treat the flight attendants with respect and that kind of thing. And so a lot of the questions they ask, the what would you do kind of questions, they're tricky questions. They're questions that don't always have one right answer, and they often have tricks in them because they really want to see how the captain thinks using high-level judgment and good decision-making. Because some people think that pilots just push buttons. I actually talk about that on my podcast in the trailer. But we actually have to make a lot of really important decisions. And that's why we have not been replaced by robots yet. It's because you need a human up there to make good decisions. So that's what they're testing for in the interview.
Yeah, that's really cool. I would like to step back a little bit, talking about the training and the flight schools. We have already talked about it in a previous podcast with, I think it was with Pigato, Felix. We talked about getting a failure in a check ride or in any lesson. It's kind of a, do you say taboo in English as well?
Yeah.
So it's not a taboo, but here in Brazil we talk about our courses, and if I say, oh, I failed in my X lesson in the private pilot, did you fail? Serious? It's kind of a taboo, and I know that in the US it doesn't work like this. Could you talk a little bit more about it?
Yes. So lots of pilots are very scared of failure, and you have to start by assuming that you will have some failures in your career, probably. No one has a perfect career, and the airlines know that you are human. You're not a machine. We all have learning processes and learning mistakes, and what they're interested in is how you react after the failure. That's partly it. And like I said, those 3 things, I'm sorry, I've learned, and then I've changed and I made better changes. But we all have mistakes. I have mistakes on my record. And one of the things that they look for is patterns. So if you just fail once and then you go several years and before you have another failure, that's not a pattern. That just means that you were a human and you made mistakes. Maybe it wasn't entirely your fault. Maybe you did have a bad instructor, or the examiner was having a bad day and they were in a bad mood. But if you have a pattern established, that's when it becomes more difficult. If you fail almost every single test that you take and it takes you a really long time in training, then it gets more and more difficult to convince them that you are a good candidate. And if there's a pilot shortage, maybe they'll hire you anyway. But the industry has a boom or a bust cycle. Sometimes it's very good for pilots and sometimes it's very bad. So when it's very competitive, it just means that someone will possibly get hired ahead of you. But do not despair even if you do have failures. I have a friend that failed almost every check ride in his training, and now he has a very nice corporate job flying a Falcon, and he's worked for the company for many years. I think maybe about 15 years. And he loves the job, and he probably will stay with the company for his whole life. And they treat his family very well. There was one time when they couldn't let him be at home for a special event, and they sent his wife flowers just to apologize. And, he wears these really nice suits and gets really great opportunities and vacations in the Virgin Islands and has all sorts of fun. So that was my friend who had lots of failures, but even he was able to get a good job. So it's harder to get a good job if you have failures, but do not despair if you are human and you make a few mistakes. That's also okay.
No one wants to talk?
No, I just would like to add that, for example, here in Brazil, we have this idea that you have to have 150 hours to become the best commercial pilot ever, because that's the minimum required by our authority here. And I can say that I failed a lot of classes, but as Captain Theresa just said, it was not a pattern. It was isolated situations, and I ended up getting my commercial rating at 180 hours. And I gotta say, I'm not ashamed of that. It's part of the life. Not everyone will get their private here with 40 hours and their commercials with 150. It's part of life. And as she said, the best thing you can do is learn from those failures and learn from those mistakes, because I think you will come stronger on the other side if you take the learning path when dealing with failures.
Learn from your mistakes. I even wrote a song about that one because that was a lesson that I had to learn. And once I was in the interview room for my captain's upgrade interview, the first question of the psychologist was, tell me about a time when you failed. Because as Theresa said, they want to see that you can fail and recover. And if you haven't failed yet, how do you know if you can recover? So guess what? I failed that interview, right? And then you have to face it again next time and get better and do things as she said right now.
And then he wrote a beautiful song.
And then I wrote a song, and sometimes Daniel sends me a screenshot that he's listening to the song.
It's my number one song in my Spotify list.
Oh, that's great. So, but
I want to send you the link later on.
I agree very strongly. They need to know that you can recover from mistakes. And I also agree that the speed of learning does not correlate to how good of a pilot you will be at the end. I was a bit of a slower learner also. And I believe that is why I am a good flight instructor, because I had to think about things different ways and many different ways for different subjects before I really learned them. So some pilots who learn naturally maybe are good at the stick and rudder skills, but aren't as good at the books. And some pilots are better at learning the books than they are at the hands-on skills. And different pilots have different strengths, but it is my belief that most people with the right education and time can become a good pilot. And again, the speed of the training has a small impact on how good of a pilot they'll be, but a lot of people just need more time to build certain areas in their brain, like the motor skills or the spatial relationships in their brain. And as the brain gets stronger, then they too can become good. It's a little bit like being an athlete. Some people start out naturally more gifted, but if most people have a good workout routine and a good exercise routine, over time, most people can become physically fit as long as they do enough repetition and they have patience and they work over time. I believe that the brain is a lot like a physical body in that regard.
Yeah, I just remembered about Danny with his students that wants to get a higher level. It sum up what Daniel says to these students. I'm absolutely sure about it.
Yes, and some people think that you can rely on the teacher to learn, and you cannot. We just tell them how to study, right? We cannot study for them.
Yes, that is so true. Students want a guarantee that there will be magic that occurs where their brain will magically learn, and they don't realize that they have to do the work themselves, and the motivation has to come from inside of them, and the work has to come from their brain as they learn.
Yes, the brain is just like a muscle, as you said.
Who goes for a marathon is the runner. It's not the personal trainer, right? And you have to have the willingness to go and to wake up every morning and go training and run your 5Ks and 10Ks and so on. Well, Captain Theresa, it has been an absolute pleasure having you here with us today. I think it's been one of the fastest 1 hour ever, right? Because when I am on the treadmill running some Ks, it's like 1 hour. It takes like 5 years. But with you here, 1 hour, it's been like 15 seconds. So I wish I could take this podcast to the treadmill with me. And now I can.
Oh, yes. Well, this has been great, too. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. And even though we're in different countries, it's interesting that many of our experiences are very similar.
Yeah, absolutely right. But still, the ways, I think the perceptions, and even some nuances, some of the details on the whole aviation will be different from here to there. Some regions will focus a little bit more on this aspect, and some will focus more on like other aspects. Like one example, I know that in China, when you go to a selection process, they will throw you several complex scenarios on your simulator ride. So you have to go really like with the mindset ready to face very difficult ride when you go for your Chinese. Like today, we learned a little bit more on how it's done in America, which is very good. So, you were always welcome to come here again and again. And we were just chatting with Guilherme, and that's the way you say William in Brazil. And he just created the clubhouse for our channel as well. So maybe we can chat over there.
Oh, I would love to come and join you again. And I will definitely look for you on Clubhouse as well. I love learning different languages. So I'm not very good at it, but I love listening to different languages. I find it very fascinating.
Well, if you want to learn a little bit of Portuguese, you can always listen to what we say here on the guests that we are having on the podcast, and I'm sure you will be familiar with lots of the terms and stories that we bring. And of course, if we start our clubhouse sessions, we do the PICAs, and that pilot in command under supervision. We will be glad to have your mentoring together.
You are guaranteed to have help if you need it. I would be happy to help you.
Well, Theresa, once again, thank you very much for being part of our podcast and for being the international guest of this month. And once again, go and check, for you guys, the listeners, go and check Realizar, Escola Realizar, our partner and very supportive flying school down there in the beach side of Torres. And Hangar 33, the clothing, our brand that supports our flying and all our gear when we go flying for non-profitable missions. All right, good. And
may I promote my podcast as well?
Of course, you can promote everything here. It's us, you know.
So, and also we are very excited. We just launched a podcast called Landings with a Flare Pilot Flight Training. Flare is spelled Flair on our podcast, and it is on most podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google, all of the major podcast platforms. So you can hear recorded sessions of our Clubhouse ground school lessons.
Very good. So I assume you have, as we have seen here, you see a lot of talent when you go and look for that. And yeah, if you want to share some more of your work, you can, of course, always.
Oh, thank you. Actually, the podcast is the main thing, and the podcast will lead you to our website, landingswithaflare.com, FLAIR.com. So feel free to check us out. We have a lot of free handouts for students and training, and we are just starting to launch podcast episodes, but they are very educational, and they are ground school lessons with pilots from around the world interacting. They are in the format of a guided discussion, which means it's like a conversation instead of a lecture, because conversations are easier to remember for the brain than just one person speaking in a lecture.
That is beautiful, and that's exactly what we're looking at when I ask you, like, you do your promotion, and I know you have a lot of things out there, and that's something that we started doing as well, right, Danny? Trying to do some chat format so we can talk about, and what every month we do a little bit of safety as well.
We brainstorm together.
So if you want to come, Theresa, you're welcome to come as well and discuss some incidents and accidents on our monthly safety podcast as well.
Wow, that is not my strongest area, but I might I would be willing to try.
Yeah. Sometimes it's good to get out of the comfort zone.
Good. So thank you all. Thank you, Enrique, for doing this connection and for performing the relay with Theresa. And thanks, Caio and João Vitor as well, and Dani. And thanks to you that you're still here hanging on our hangar conversation. And see you next week.
You really did it.
Again.
Come on. See you, boys.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you, everyone. And by the way, our website isn't actually launched yet, but it will be next week. So,
But
That's
yeah,
perfect.
so until the point, like when this is live, your website will be live.
I figured.
That's it.
It was a true pleasure. Thank you very much.
Call them up there, go 525.